All right, we'll kick us off here right at the noontime hour. Thank you everybody for joining us here today. My name is Dave Wood. I'm a financial advisor with the group here locally in Westboro, Boston Harbor Wealth Advisors. We custody assets at Raymond James, at Fidelity, Charles Schwab, and BNY Mellon. And the goal of that is to be able to act as a true fiduciary, act as truly independent for our clients. Excited everybody joined us today for Savvy Women, Smart Investors. This past weekend, my family and I, two boys, wife, we went to my sister's place in Jersey City for my nephew's third birthday party. So we picked up the boys at daycare on Friday after work and we're on our way. So normally that trip is like 3 hours and 30 minutes. So I put in the GPS and it immediately says unexpected traffic, 4 hours and 30 minutes. So as always with car rides, I'd love to have the GPS in. I do it on my way to work. I do it for car rides to Jersey City. I need to know what my ETA is. I'm sure that applies for many of you out there. I want to be informed of any changes along the way. So, sure enough, as we get on the road, having two boys under 4, we made multiple rest stop trips, right? McDonald's, gas station, you name it. There was unexpected construction. Later turned into unexpected slow drivers or maybe expected slow drivers. But you get the point. We were going from A to B, but my GPS, i.e. Google Maps, gets me there and really provides that calming voice of reason. And yes, for those who are wondering, we did eventually make it at roughly 10:15, 5 hours, and 15 minutes later, we pulled into the Jersey City hotel. But we got there. As a financial advisor, I act as GPS or Google Maps for clients. Life isn't a straight A to B. You know your destination, but there's many bumps along the way, for better, for worse. And we really help our clients get there to their destination, which in many cases is all about retirement. The goal today is to inform you of different financial life stages unique to women and how to prepare for them. So my team here at Boston Harbor, we work with individuals like Jess and Heather, family law and estate planning attorneys, to really tie in the personal financial plan with every stage of life, aside from just investment management. So we're going to be tying in specific client examples. I have a few stories to articulate how to manage these situations if you ever get into a pickle like these, and we will go from there. So I introduce myself. I am very lucky to have two amazing business owners, amazing women with us here today that have given up some of their times to do that. So first, I'd like to introduce Heather O'Connor. Heather owns O'Connor Family Law, both here in Westboro and the South Shore. Heather, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. So obviously, my name's Heather O'Connor. I'm really excited to be here today. And where I am now comes from a quote from my ex-husband. And during my first marriage, we had 3 kids. He told me one time when I told him I wanted to get divorced, he looked at me and said, "If you leave me, I will make sure you have nothing. You will have no house. You will have no money. I'll make sure your kids hate you, and you will be lucky to sleep on a park bench." And for that, I kept staying, despite the fact that my marriage had turned abusive. And it wasn't until I found out that my children were also being abused that I drew the line. And so I moved forward with a divorce, which was an incredibly scary, emotional process that the divorce process is not set up to actually get people from point A to point B in a way that they can flourish after the fact. And I looked at that and I said, despite the fact I only had a high school diploma at the time and my kids were all under the age of 6, I said something needs to change. And I decided to be that change. So I went back to school. I did community college, undergrad, law school, built my career in 2016, opened O'Connor Family Law. And I'm very proud to say, I believe we are the largest single female-owned law, divorce and custody firm in Massachusetts.
That's awesome. Yeah, we were just talking about that. So July, we're going to have a nice celebration, Heather, I'm sure.
Yep.
And much well-deserved. Secondly, but not lastly, is a good friend of mine as well, Jess Pesky. She's out of the Marlboro area. She is a phenomenal estate planning attorney. I work very closely with her, with my clients. And Jess, if you'd like to say hello to the group.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the kind introduction, Dave. And Heather, thanks for sharing your story. It's definitely empowering to hear it. As Dave said, I am Jessica Pesce of Pesce Law Office, and I am an estate planning attorney. Oftentimes, when people hear the word estate plan, they will think, I don't need that. I'm, not set up for that. I don't have enough assets for that. But it's really going back to the basics of making sure you have the right documents in place to protect yourself and also to protect your loved ones. I think having the right documents in place, knowing that you have decision makers who will take care of you and take care of your loved ones, and assets set up in a way that can provide for your family or the people or charities you care for, is a very empowering decision. No one should go about life wondering, what will happen if I'm not around? How will things continue? Getting those documents in place is really freeing and very empowering. And to me, there is no better decision you can make than the one where you decide what happens to you and how you choose to go out in this world. So I help individuals, families, business owners. Everyone over the age of 18 is a good candidate for an estate plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Jess. I've known Jess for a few years now, worked closely with her, and I consistently mess up her last name when I pronounce it. So Jess, I'm sorry about that.
It's all good.
All right, so we'll get into the deets of the webinar here today. The first is a client story I have for you. A woman in her 60s, client of ours, homemaker, never worked. 30 years of marriage, kids out of the house, empty nester. Husband decided, well, he didn't want to be married anymore. So poor Sharon never had balanced the checkbook in her life. Didn't even know what to look for in a divorce proceeding. So here's how we helped. We worked with a divorce attorney, similar to Heather. We reviewed all the statements that the assets that the husband had left behind. Through careful digging, we really found that the husband was hiding assets, which is very common, unfortunately, hiding 401k assets from a previous company. But my colleague, the family law attorney, were able to ask questions about previous employers. We uncovered those additional assets. Fast forward, team taught Aaron. We worked with Sharon to pay bills, how to construct a budget, and really help her get into a new house with a mortgage by hand-holding her through that entire process to get her into that new house. After that, we're able to build a financial plan for her so she could really see and how she could retire on her own terms, right? That's really what we all want to be able to do. And in addition, we built out an investment portfolio that's going to aid her now, but also into retirement. So with that background, Heather, how have things changed for women when it comes to family law?
I think answering this really depends on how far back we're looking. And I think a lot of times when we're making these comparisons, we're going back to like the 50s and 60s when the mom was really the stay-at-home provider. The dad was the one who was going out and working and earning all the money. And what you saw at that time was really that one, divorce had a huge stigma surrounding it. It was not okay to be the divorced parent. And it also left the woman, because she was the one who usually was the stay-at-home mom, really still very dependent on the husband post-divorce because of the financial. What we see now is tons of women who are owning their own business, are extremely highly compensated, and it's putting women in the driver's seat, which is really cool, especially being a woman. And at the same time, we've also seen a lot of men, not all, but a lot of men step up in that father role, and it's really becoming more equal parenting. And so we've seen a shift in the courts there as well, where it used to be, dad would get every other weekend and maybe a dinner visit or two. And now dads are really starting to get more of a 50-50 parenting schedule as the norm. The stigma is gone. I'm sure everybody at this point knows somebody or has somebody in their family who's gone through a divorce. So it's not this big, scary process that you feel completely alone in anymore. And with that, the networks and the support for people going through a divorce has just, it's incredible. The the support that people are doing. There's a group called the Sparrow Connection that is creating homes for people who are leaving domestic violence situations. There's New Hope in the Attleboro area that has incredible resources. So there's all these, the Divorce Squad, I'll shout that one out because they have some amazing information as well. There's all this support where it's still there. Divorce will never not be emotional. It will never not be a situation that's fun to go through. Nobody wants to go through it, but the end result can be what you really want to go through. And there's so much support now to get you through it. So I think those have been the main huge differences.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Following up on that, if there's one thing the audience could do today to put them in a better spot from your perspective.
Well, I think whether we're looking at divorce already or just putting themselves in a better spot, and I'd prefer to start there because I'm actually a huge proponent of marriage. My kids, when they were little, people would say, "What does your mom do?" And they'd be like, "Oh, my mom breaks up marriages." And I'd be like, "Please, can we say it somehow differently?" But it's the best thing you can do is when you're getting married, treat your marriage as a business partnership. It's not romantic. It doesn't sound sexy, but it is so true. It keeps up good communication. It helps keep everybody's goals in line. It helps make sure people are aware of their finances. That is probably the biggest problem we see with people coming in for divorce is a lot of times one person takes over the bills and there's just a trust that goes into they're going to manage the money just fine. And they don't. So I think, when you're talking about the one thing people can do is really have a quarterly meeting, whether that's with a therapist or whatever, but during your marriage, have regular communication with your spouse because that will keep you away from having to hire somebody like me.
That's great. And then lastly, Heather, what would you say is biggest challenge that women continue to face in your perspective?
I'd say, as I said, there's a lot more women who are in higher power roles, which is fantastic. And I think we're seeing a change of women really stepping up and taking control of their finances and understanding what that is. But there is still a lot of work to be done. And I think a lot of times when we're looking at just the average case, most women don't understand their financial picture. And it's incredibly scary to, a lot of times we see people very attached to their home and they want to be able to keep their marital home. But then they get in a situation where they want that so badly. And we look through everything and we say, but financially, even if you're getting child support, even if you're getting alimony, you might be in a situation where you're completely house poor. And that's not going to be the best situation for you. So helping people figure out where they are financially so that they can plan not only to get them through divorce, but what are their goals in 5-10 years? How do we set them up throughout the divorce to get them where they want to go? And, I love this webinar so much because it brings the different pieces that people really need to know on my level of going through a divorce that is so, so incredibly important to get yourself to that post-divorce, like happy life where everything's going great. Because you will get there if you're going through it.
Yep. Well, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So wanted to segue into a second client story here. So Mike and Kristen are clients of ours. Kristen's goal is to retire early. She's a kindergarten teacher. So husband's a high level C-suite executive at a tech company in Boston. He's 60, she's 57. They've been clients of our team for quite some bit of time. In the beginning of the planning relationship, Kristen always had indicated she wants to retire early. That was her prerogative, which is totally valid. So what did we do? Well, being a teacher, we analyzed her employee benefits, specifically the pension piece, which there's a lot of changing parts there, by the way, with the Social Security Fairness Act. And we looked at the different ages at retirement, 55, 60, 65. And what we determined through analysis was that she couldn't retire at any of those ages without saving more. That's a big part of what we do, is not just how to save, but where to be saving. So through our analysis, we recommended starting with just $25 a week. Right? Any amount is better than none. And as she got pay raises, what did we do? We put more of that money to work. We increased her savings over time. And now since that period, she's roughly saving over $15,000 a year. Slow and steady wins the race. So as a result of the planning, we were able to create a scenario for her. She can retire at age 58, doesn't need to work anymore. Mike's going to continue on for a while. Part of that's because he says I need to be out of the house, but that's between them. But this is really a story of basic investing, compound interest 101. How saving today is really the second best day to save. Yesterday was really the best day. Husband's going to work, like I said, Mike will probably work until 66 based on the plan. But now Kristen's going to spend time doing what she wants to do, which she's going to be volunteering, and she doesn't have to work anymore, which is fantastic. And so it's a great example of how we help people work through a plan. And like I said, slow and steady, over time, you can get there.
Thanks for sharing that, Dave. I think that is a great example. So with your experience working with your clients, what are some things that have changed for women when it comes to financial planning?
Absolutely. First and foremost, women make up a larger percentage of the workforce, plain and simple. You're going to see 57% was last year. It's going to be up 60. It's growing, and for good reason. So they're the primary breadwinners. We're seeing dual incomes in households, you name it. So that's a big thing that's come into the world, and all for good reason, right? Another shift is the evolution of pensions to 401ks, right? So you have that three-legged retirement stool: pension, Social Security, and retirement. Most pensions aren't really a thing anymore. So you used to be my company or my government or whomever is going to pay me. Now it's your responsibility to save. The 401k, it's on you. Fortunately, they've mandated newer plans where you're automatically enrolled, but it is really on you to say, you know what, I'm going to increase my percentage this year, or I'm going to do a max out, or I'm going to do an after-tax bucket, right? So that's what we work with our clients on, is say, send us your employee benefits. We're going to comb through the entire booklet for you, and we'll advise based on the scenario that best fits you. Take advantage of all these employer plans. Do enough to get the match. That's the free money. You don't get free money often offered to you in life. Take it. A lot of these 401k plans have what's called an auto escalation feature. What do I mean by that? Well, you're doing enough to get the match at 4%. Next year, it's going to automatically increase you to 5%. If you have that feature, please, please, please enroll in that, because it's automatically going to increase for you. We say to a lot of clients, what are you doing in your 401k? And do you think you can increase it by 1% this year? Do you know how little of an effect that really has on your budget over time? Before you know it, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you're going to be maxing out your 401k, and it may not even feel like it from a budget perspective, which is a good thing. And then really the big stat at the end is 90% of women are going to be responsible for their finances at some point in their life. So if it's not today, it's coming. So Heather mentioned that awareness, having that confidence I talked about with Sharon in the first example. We really help educate our clients to know enough to be dangerous. I think that's the theme. And if there is one spouse that's primarily doing the finances, that's great. But that second person, we really, when we have client meetings, we want them to be just as involved in the process.
You've just given us so many great tips and advice there, but if there's one thing that you could offer our audience today to put them in a better spot with their financial plan, what would that be?
I'm going to give you two, Jess. One is invest as soon as you can. I know that's probably an obvious, but if you aren't, consider an example like Kristen's, where you're doing something like $25 a week, just something to get compounding working in your favor. All right, so that's first. Secondly, I'm a huge fan of budgeting. Everything we do, financial planning related, it begins and it ends with, what do you spend, Mr. or Mrs. Client, on a monthly or an annual basis? If you say you spend $5,000 a month and it's really $10,000 a month, well, the planning we're doing may not really work for you. So really having understanding of where your dollars are going, is super important. And not everybody's going to be a little bit different. There's a lot of apps out there. We use spreadsheets. Just having a rough ballpark knowledge of what you're spending is so, so important, because you know why? It's going to then tell you where you can allocate those remaining dollars, where you can actually save now, and where are the opportunities for that. One thing to write down, you maybe have heard of it before, but it's a very common budget or savings methodology. It's the 50-30-20 rule. So if you need a framework, that's your framework to go by. 50% of your budget should be going to your needs. Think like food, water, shelter, clothing. Okay. My wife would argue that her manicure and pedicure should be part of that 50% bucket, and I'm okay with that. You do you, honey. 30% is your wants, going out to eat, the movies, your golf, you name it. And then 20% is your savings. It's your rainy day fund. It's your 401k. It's your brokerage accounts. So 50-30-20 is a really good framework to wrap your head around if you're having a tough time with budgeting.
Awesome. Have you noticed any challenges that women face when it comes to financial planning? And if so, any recommendations on how to overcome those challenges?
Sure. The common one we see is with caregiving. Unfortunately had to go through it with my grandmother, who was my custodian a few years back. I was the primary caregiver as she was on her way out, so to speak. But women become the primary caregiver when, aging parents are dealing with illnesses and you name it. So women are more likely than not to be the ones responsible for that. And obviously it works up and down the family tree. But one thing I would say to people is be open and communicate with your family about those expectations. I know this is not an easy conversation to have, and I'm not saying I have the playbook for that conversation. But what I would say to you is have the conversation with your parents about what their expectations are for long-term care. Because there's 3 ways they're going to fund it. It's going to be self-funded through their own assets. It's going to be through some sort of long-term care policy. Or third, guess what? It's going to be you as the adult child. So having that conversation about money, I know it's not easy. It works the same down the family tree with college. Having that conversation with your kids about expectations for how much you're going to fit the bill for college and what's on them. It's just going to ease the pain down the road.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And thanks for the questions. So the last story that I'm going to share with you guys is estate planning related. It's a gentleman, Charles, we love working with, and it really ties into what's called the marital trust with a step-up provision to it. That's a tongue twister, as you can see. I can't even pronounce it, but it goes into phenomenal tax savings that you can have by doing proper estate plan work. So tie this all together. We work with our clients, estate planning attorneys, consistently, like Jess, to protect assets from going to probate, but also to pass as many assets we can to family while mitigating estate taxes we pay upon death. So our team, like I mentioned, has a client, Charles. He's in his mid-80s, wonderful, wonderful guy. He, about 5 to 10 years ago, refined his estate plan to make sure that if he did pass, they could save the marital deduction while passing it to the kids while living. So unfortunately, Charles's wife passed away during COVID unexpectedly. We were able to use that step up in basis, which allowed to save the clients over $300,000 in taxes. In addition, we're able to act upon Charles's and his late wife's wishes and pass over the trust to the 2 boys for them to use as they wish. Why am I telling you this? It's because when this happens, it's because you worked with an estate planning attorney and a financial advisor to clearly articulate your wants and desires prior to your passing. You have the keys at that point to be in control. So with that as a backdrop, Jess, I wanted to ask you, how have things changed for women when it comes to estate planning?
I think a common theme that all of us have recognized today is that for a long time in each of our respective industries, women were treated more as a footnote than being any kind of main character. Particularly with estate planning, plans were built for women, not with them. And, you know, there's a lot at stake, especially with married couples when both parties are not at the table having these discussions. Because I think we all recognize that today women are more financially empowered than ever. We're earning more, we're the breadwinner, we're building businesses, we're investing more, all while managing households, being a caretaker in some capacity or another. And I'll just go ahead and say it, and sorry, Dave, but we're living longer than you. So there's that. So no longer are estate plans happening for the woman in mind and characterizing us as a supporting actor role. We are main character energy, and we should lean into that because we should lead the conversation. I'm finding now more than ever that in consults with married couples, women are asking more questions, thinking more about our own legacy, thinking about the practicality of how a plan is going to work with the perfect balance of emotional intelligence behind the planning. Sometimes it is about saving money, and sometimes it's about setting things up that are going to work for the family long term. We're not thinking about this anymore in terms of who's going to take care of me, who will take care of the kids, but we are asking what happens if I live a long time, if I get sick? How can I support my kids in a meaningful but strategic way? And in my opinion, this is a really sophisticated shift from the norm of what we've often read in literature or seen in the movies, because it's reshaping estate planning in a really thoughtful, powerful way.
Great. Good segue into what listeners can do to put them in a better spot, Jess, moving forward.
So the most basic thing that you could do today in this very moment is think about who your decision makers should be in your estate plan. An estate plan includes something as simple as a healthcare proxy, which puts someone in place to make medical decisions for you if you can't make them yourself. It includes a power of attorney, which appoints someone to make legal and financial decisions for you if you can't be in control. These are documents that would name who should speak for you medically and financially and legally if you could not speak for yourself. You don't have to wait until your estate is perfectly organized. There is no minimum amount of money that you need to have in order to do an estate plan. At its most basic level, these are two documents that protect you during lifetime, and that's actually often where the real risk lies. There is nothing worse than getting a phone call from someone saying, you know, my parent or my spouse has lost capacity. There's been some kind of, you know, catastrophic accident, and the hospital is telling me that they won't talk to me. Or spouse's parents are saying that they want to be making the medical decisions, or they're trying to interfere with our finances. So you really need to think of these documents as a personal emergency backup system. And I would say the other big one that often causes people to pause is who's going to take care of the kids. And so you really have to think about that in two steps. You have the caretaker for their kids, for their health and their welfare, and that's their guardian. But you can also have different agents in place who would be capable of managing money for the kids. So, you know, maybe you trust them to invest wisely and make the right financial decisions for your kids, but you're not so sure that they're going to ensure your kids are well fed and clothed and, you know, are going to school and whatnot. So it's really just understanding the roles that are a part of your plan and making a decision on who those agents should be, because that is where people really get caught up the most from what I've seen. And in my opinion, I think it's the greatest kindness you can offer to the people you love, that in a time of need, that they have clarity and direction, when otherwise, if there's no plan, they're going to feel very stuck and overwhelmed.
That's great. Lastly, Jess, when it comes to estate planning, what's a big challenge that women continue to face?
I think we're all waiting for permission. Permission to prioritize estate planning, permission to believe that our voice matters, that our goals are worth planning for, that it's not selfish to plan, it's not, unwise to spend money on something like an estate plan. It's a smart, strategic, and empowering thing to do. And I think because we're so used to taking care of everyone else, whether it's our kids, our parents, our staff. For me, my dog is, one of the things on my list of things I have to take care of. Estate planning can certainly feel like one more thing on the list. But the truth is, I don't think we can be a rock for everyone else if our own foundation is not secure. So estate planning is not just responsible, it should be liberating, because it should free you up to live your best life, knowing that if something unexpected happens, your voice will still be heard. And that's what savvy women do. We plan ahead, we protect what matters, we do not wait for crisis to take control. Estate planning is very much the opposite of crisis planning. It's a gift you give yourself before something happens. It's a gift to your loved ones, and we should embrace that because it can be really transformative.
Really well said, Jess. Thank you for sharing that. So that wraps up the client stories for the webinar here today. I would ask if folks on the webinar, if they have questions, to please utilize the chat feature that we have, and we can kind of take them in order of how they come in. I'll just start us off because I have some questions for both of you guys, and then we can jump into participants. But Jess, common question we get from people is, do I really need a trust, or is a will enough to cover everything?
So a will is a really important document because at minimum it accomplishes a couple of main goals that are always at top of mind with estate planning. Number one, it appoints the personal representative, which is a new term for executor in Massachusetts, and that's the person who is in charge of managing your estate and distributing the assets out. You also identify in your will who your beneficiaries are. And then if you do have minor children, it's the document where you name guardians for your minor children. What most people don't realize about wills, and I really blame Main Street media and the movies for this, because oftentimes you see when someone passes away, an attorney will come to the house and sit in a circle with the family, pull out the will. They're in like a black suit, they read the will, and the family gets their checks and walks off into the sunset. I have never done that, and I hope never to have to do it, because I can't think of anything more uncomfortable than doing that. That is the last thing someone should be doing, especially when you lose someone. With a will, what a lot of people don't realize is that it only governs probate assets, and that's anything in your sole name at death. So for example, if you own a piece of real estate, your home, and it's just in your name, your will does govern what happens to that asset. But there is a whole court process that you have to go through in order to utilize your will. Your personal representative actually has to be appointed by the court. There has to be proper language in the will giving the personal representative permission to sell the property. You have to file an inventory. There's an accounting. And that process, going through the probate process with the court, can be very expensive. It can take a very long time. And Heather, perhaps you can speak to this too, because we kind of run in the same courthouses. But for me, probate court is not usually where I want to be or where I want to take my clients through. It might be a little bit different in your industry, kind of necessary. But generally, I want to set my clients up to avoid probate. And that's where trust planning comes into play. Oftentimes, clients need trust planning to avoid probate, but also to have a mechanism to set up assets long-term for management, for minor children, or for other beneficiaries. Anything that you put into trust avoids probate, and oftentimes a probate avoidance plan costs much less than going through probate.
Yeah, I usually tell people, when you have a trust plan, it's like when you play Monopoly and you get to just go.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through all the struggles. And I completely agree. Even on my side, You have to go to court to get divorced, but you want to go as little as possible. Ideally, we do a lot of high conflict, so we're in there quite often, but that's not the ideal for most people. So yeah,
I like that analogy. I'm going to steal that.
feel free.
Um, Heather, for you, parenting time and support, how do those kind of work interplay in a divorce?
So for a long time, it used to be unless the couple was earning more than, at one point it was 250,000, then they increased it to 400,000, then it was only child support at play. There's a recent case, which I say recent, I think at this point we're maybe a year or 2 years out, so recent figuratively. But it allows both alimony and support to come onto the table within any divorce case. The judge, if it's going to trial, the judge has to consider both alimony and child support. And it's kind of complicated, so I won't go into it. But things to really understand is the parenting schedule really dictates what the support is supposed to be. Now, what's supposed to happen is you deal with the parenting schedule first so that what's best for your child is not influenced by what's best for your pocketbook. But a lot of times they go hand in hand. And a high misconception, and I see it, I'm in Facebook parent groups, and I see people saying this all the time, and it's just not true, that if you have 50-50, that means somebody is not getting child support. It's not accurate unless your incomes are so close to being the same. There's a whole calculation that goes in, but it's still very much that the person who makes more, even on a 50-50 basis, is going to be paying child support. Probably not as much as if it was, the other parent had primary custody, but that's still there. And I've seen people like, don't go to court, just waive it. Don't do that. Make sure you really understand your rights and responsibilities. At least you can jump on a calculator through the Mass Gov site and run through a basis. You don't even need an attorney to do it. Just get an idea of what you are legally entitled to before you start giving it away.
This could tap into both of your specialties here, but protecting assets through your estate or through a prenup if you decide to get remarried one day. So I don't know who wants to go first, but
That's a good one. I think that's definitely something we can both answer. I actually think if you are going to get remarried, especially if you have a blended family situation, children from prior relationship or whatnot, you definitely need an estate plan. But I would also advise my clients to get a prenup before they get remarried. Heather, do you want to touch on the prenup first?
If I could stand from the rooftop and yell, just everybody get a prenup, it's not a bad thing, and I think it goes back to what I was saying of during your marriage, treat it more like a business partnership. Treat it more as though you are two equals coming in instead of this, Disney fairy tale of the prince that rescues the princess. That's not reality anymore. And being able to protect, especially if you have built up, there's a lot of people getting married much later in life now. If you have built up a lot of assets, you want to be able to protect those. And I usually compare it to car insurance. Nobody gets in their car saying, oh, I'm not going to make it where I'm going to go. I'm probably going to die. This is going to be bad. I better have car insurance. No, you don't get it for that reason. You get it for that worst case scenario in case that happens so that you are covered. And a prenup is the exact same thing. A lot of people, when they start the conversation, somebody will say, why are you coming in just expecting us to get divorced? The rates, the percentages of divorce are what they are, and it's still very close to 50% across the board. Now, I actually think more marriages are going to make it when they get a prenup because they're having those important conversations. They're talking about finances. They're talking about their future plans. They're checking back in when they're buying new assets to say, okay, are we still on the same page with this? If you are not having those conversations, your divorce is probably not going to go very great if it ends up down that road. So 100%, same thing. I agree with Jessica completely. If you're getting remarried, you want to make sure you're protecting what you have for your children. And if you don't do that, everything you've brought into that marriage could get divided. And that's a huge chunk for your kids to give up just because you found somebody else.
I don't think there's anything worse than when meeting with a couple who's contemplating marriage and, they're talking about wanting to do a joint estate plan, but it's obvious they have very different opinions on where their assets should go. It's difficult to do an estate plan in that kind of setting, and it potentially could be a conflict, right? So oftentimes that's a question that I ask standard on all of my intake forms. Do you have a prenup or an antenuptial agreement? Because it's my duty to read it and make sure that what I'm implementing is not contrary to those agreements, right? Or if the client wants to change something, that I'm telling them, hey, you need to go back and also get this revised. A lot of times clients will say, well, can't we just put in my will or my trust that I want this account to pass to my children, or I want this property that is a rental, it's not the marital home, to go to my kids. I don't want it to go to a spouse. Yeah, of course, there are things that you can do in your plan, but your spouse is also entitled to certain things under the law too. And in my experience, oftentimes the court's always going to take a look at everything at the time of divorce, right, Heather, and see if it makes sense, if it's equitable, and whatnot. And so, to her point, you shouldn't think of these documents as a one and done transaction, especially with an estate plan. If you acquire more assets after you get married or during the marriage, your estate plan should reflect the division of those assets in the event of death. And I think that's a key thing to remember too. An estate plan usually addresses death, right? Not so much a separation. There are things we put in there to address if there is a legal separation and what should happen to those assets. But we're primarily thinking of a scenario where your spouse has passed away. And again, maybe there are certain things you don't want them to get. But if you're going through contemplating divorce, or that's coming up, or you're concerned about that, I think the best laid out plan really contains the estate planning piece and a prenup. I think they have to work very well together.
Yeah, and in the divorce arena, if you and your spouse have an estate plan, that does not dictate how things get divided. So there's a difference between your family having a trust that you potentially can inherit. There's a difference with that type of trust versus having one on your own. Your own trust has no impact on the divorce, except to make sure that that magic language is in your divorce agreement, that once you sign that divorce, any trust or estate plan that's out there between the two of you is immediately revoked. Because in the judgment, it comes into effect. Because if not, your divorce doesn't become absolute for a minimum of 90 days. And so in that period, if someone were to die, if that language is not within your judgment, you haven't actually gotten divorced yet, and your estate plan is going to take full force and effect.
Right.
Thanks, guys. One question each left for you guys before we wrap up here. Adult children making decisions. If something were to happen, Jess, we still need legal documents in place? Talk to me a little bit more about what that looks like.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people assume it's a given that, your oldest child, that's a very common thing, that, the oldest child is the decision maker. Well, because you feel that way, or because you have it in a document that, you've signed and it's been notarized and it's a valid legal document. There is no default with most financial institutions or medical providers that your oldest or your youngest child, or the child that's been going with you to your doctor's appointments the last 10 years, can be a decision maker unless it's documented through a healthcare proxy or through a power of attorney. So oftentimes there are, if you have a relationship with a medical provider, they will turn to a child that they know and ask for opinions or advice. Perhaps if you go to the bank and you have questions, you might get a teller who will answer questions with you if they're familiar with you. But if it actually comes time to decisions needing to be made, like pulling the plug or saying yes or no to a surgery or a treatment option or liquidating an account, most places will not take the word of any person, child or not, unless there's legal documentation to back up their authority to make those types of decisions.
Right. And I always suggest to people, if you've heard of the Evernote app, a nice elephant logo to it. It's a great way to safely and securely upload documents that you have. So any of those kind of healthcare proxy related things, you're always going to have your iPhone with you, right? So it's a really easy way to make sure you have the right documentation in the heat of the moment. Last question I have for you
Hold on,
is,
can I just jump in and say something about that? Is
Sure.
the importance of really having those discussions with your children and not just making a decision as well. I know when I did my estate plan, you know, my kids were grown up at this point, all adults, but I had the conversation and said, okay, if we're in a situation and somebody has to decide to pull the plug on me, who wants that responsibility? And my two youngest were immediately like the oldest one. And then our weird sense of humor, she sent a picture of like a plug coming out of the wall. And then they were like, okay, maybe not her, but it's a heavy responsibility for your child. So make sure it's not just you saying, okay, I think this person could handle it. Make sure emotionally they're prepared to handle that as well.
Yeah.
You raise a really good point. Just to draw one more thing. Sorry, Dave.
You're fine. Go ahead.
To Heather's point too, have the conversations with your children or any of your decision makers so no one is surprised. I serve as a healthcare proxy for my parents. I have one sibling. We tackle a lot of things together, but my parents have appointed me as the proxy. And I think my brother was a little surprised at that. We do think very differently. I do tend to lead with a little bit more emotion. Not to say he doesn't, but he just kind of has his way of thinking. But we've had the discussion. We know how we're going to operate together. We will make decisions together, but I am the proxy, so I'm the person that has to say the final words to the doctor. But I think if you can have a collaborative conversation with your kids or any decision maker to know what they want and who should be involved, that's really key to avoiding conflict and crisis.
Yeah.
And just to add that, because it's a real life situation, if you do not have those conversations, we had a case where it was exactly that. Somebody was appointed a healthcare proxy. A huge accident happened with the mother. She was, not doing well. The brother and the sister got into a huge fight, and now there's like cross restraining orders all across the board. And I'm sure this is the last thing the mom would actually want while she's laying there potentially at her deathbed, is to know that what she did created more chaos. And that's why having those conversations and making sure, it doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with you, but at least if they have the education and the knowledge to prepare for it, they're in a much better position.
Yeah, if you have an estate plan and your attorney has not offered a family meeting, at least with your kids, to kind of walk them through the plan, I always think that's a great idea. It's something that I offer for my clients. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of what are all the assets and how much is my inheritance going to be. That is not the conversations we are having. We are talking about, these are the documents that your parents have in place. This is what they're for, and here are the decision makers. Here's how you're going to work together, or here's what mom and dad wants.
No, that's great. And it continued to hit home one consistent theme here throughout, which was communication, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's long-term care, your marriage, healthcare decisions, finances, communication is really at the root of all this. So great back and forth, Jess and Heather. Thank you for sharing that here. I'm going to wrap us up in the sake of time here. And again, for everybody on the call, this is a recorded webinar. So you were fortunate enough to join us, but feel free to share it with friends that you have as well. I just want to share contact information for our lovely speakers here today. And what I wanted to say first and foremost is thanking everybody for being on the call. Appreciate that. I mentioned in the beginning how we act as a GPS. We act as a GPS for clients. We touched on a few different events here today that can cause backups, delays in your plan along the way. My hope, Jess's and Heather's, is that you learned how to deal with maybe some of those detours in life. but just as importantly, that you feel confident that you know folks that can assist, like Jess, like Heather. I'd strongly suggest keeping both of their contact information or names in your pocket. May not be applicable to you, but I'm sure that you know somebody that could use both of what they do. There's an old Fidelity commercial, aging myself here. It's probably at least 10 years old, but it says our plans have changed. I don't know if anybody remembers that with the green arrow, the road going down. Well, if and when your plans do change, you need assistance and you need to know where to go for help. So Jess and Heather and their wonderful teams are equipped to help you guys navigate through those challenges. So on behalf of the group here today, I want to thank everybody for taking part. I hope you guys have a good rest of the week, and we'll hope to talk to you guys soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.